Welcome. I'm Angela Davis, and I'm the 4 a.m. Quilter. If you've never been here before, welcome. And to my viewers that have already been subscribing and viewing, thank you so much. Here at my channel, I share, care, and create with you. And today, I have to shout out to one of my viewers. This viewer made a comment about my last video about an unconventional quilt that I created. And she said it reminded her of crumb quilting. So that gave me an idea, gave me some inspiration. So thank you for caring enough to share your thoughts and to share your comment with me and to inspire me to make this quilt. So this is my version of a crumb quilt. And I used adding machine tape. Now I've had adding machine tape in my drawer for a couple of years now, but it's one of those things where it's out of sight, out of mind. And until I got that comment, I'd forgotten all about it. So I pulled out my adding machine tape and I started making this crumb quilt. So thank you so much for caring enough to share all of your thoughts and ideas with me. That's what it's all about. It's so appreciated. But this is to commemorate all of you caring enough to share your comments with me. And for those of you who are liking me and subscribing, I appreciate it so much. So again, let me stop talking. This is my version of a crumb quilt, and I used adding machine tape. And as you can see, it's just a lap-size quilt, and it's a perfect size for just, having a little throw on the couch when I have a cup of tea in the evening or in the morning, reading a book or watching TV. Had a lot of fun making this quilt. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed making it. So from my sewing room to your sewing room, I'm Angela Davis, and I'm the 4 a.m. Quilter. Enjoy this video, me making this crumb quilt. Enjoy.
I started out with a roll of adding machine tape, and I unwound quite a few feet of it. And once I had what I thought would be a nice long length, I took it and I folded it in on itself several times, and then I pinched either end, and where that crease was, I cut, so that I ended up with several pieces of approximately 12 to 14 inches of adding machine tape. Then from there, I started sewing. I would put 2 pieces of scrap fabric right sides together on my tape, and I would sew a 1/4 inch. And then from there, I would finger press that seam open. And I continued to add scraps of fabric and varying shapes and widths, sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And on some scrap fabrics, I may have trimmed a little bit after I sewed it on to make it a more manageable size on my strip. If I had a long scrap, I would cut it, and then I would set it down on the last piece of fabric that I sewed, and I'd sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance and finger press. And I just continued in this manner, taking different shapes of scraps from my pile, whether they were long strips or odd shapes. Sometimes I would trim them before I sewed them on, and sometimes I would trim them after I sewed them on. But I just continued in this manner until I knew that that strip of adding machine tape would be covered completely. I also save the ends off of a strip set when I'm sewing for other projects, and that's what I did on this last section here. I continued on in this manner until I had several strip sets finished. I used a very small stitch length, approximately 18 stitches per inch, and I did that so that in the end, when I go to tear that paper out, I won't loosen those stitches or tear any of the stitches out. Once I had several strip sets completed, I trimmed around the paper, being careful not to cut the paper. My goal here is to create squares with these strip sets. Now I'm pressing, and I'm using a dry iron because of the paper, and I'm pressing on both sides. And this is to help set the seam and also, of course, to press the fabric. Now I'm bending and folding the strip right on each of those seams, pinching it nice and flat, and now I'm tearing, starting at one end and working my way to the bottom. And this is where the small stitch length comes into play. Because it's such a small stitch length, when I go to tear that paper out, that seam is maintained and I won't be tearing the seam out. As I was creating my strip sets, two of my strip sets ended up being a little bit short, one along the long side and one along the end. So what I did was I pieced two pieces of scraps together and I sewed a 1/4 inch seam allowance and pressed it so that this particular strip would be completed. On this strip set, I got a rectangle piece and I put it on the diagonal so that when I sewed that 1/4 inch seam allowance and opened it up, when I go to trim, that creates a little triangle on the end. So sometimes you end up being a little short, but you can still correct it. Once I had my strips finished, I cut my strips in half, sewed them together to create squares. And my squares ended up being 6.5 inches cut so that they finish at 6 inches. I used an old tan sheet to create the spaces in between. And then I used some black pre-cut strips that I already had in my scrap bin to create the horizontal strips in between and also the border. I didn't have enough of that tan sheet to continue along creating the strips along the horizontal and the border, but I'm glad that that happy mistake happened because I really like how the black makes the colors pop and the tan sort of recedes. All in all, I'm very pleased with how this quilt turned out. It's a nice little lap-size quilt, which is wonderful for just sitting on the couch and watching TV, reading a book, having a cup of tea.